In the spring of 1908, the charred remains of a farmhouse outside Leeport, Indiana, revealed a scene that would grip the nation in horror. Over 40 dismembered bodies buried in shallow graves, their limbs cut with surgical precision and skulls crushed by heavy blows. All had answered the same newspaper advertisement from a wealthy widow seeking companionship and marriage, promising prosperity on her thriving pig farm. This was no isolated crime scene, but the remains of a killing operation that had run for over a decade beneath the facade of rural respectability. The most shocking find was a headless woman's body in the basement, smaller and lighter than Belle Gunness, the farm's infamous owner. The discovery ignited whispers that Belle might have escaped, leaving death and fire behind. Leeport in 1908 was a booming railroad town of 15,000, a hub of industry and immigration, set 60 miles east of Chicago. Prosperous farms and modernizing streets reflected the American dream. And among its immigrant success stories was Belle-born Brynhild Storseth in Norway, who arrived in 1881, worked as a servant, married, and rose to own a 42-acre farm. But her path was marked by tragedy and profit, suspicious fires, sudden deaths, and convenient insurance payouts. By the time of the fire, she had buried 2 husbands, several foster children, and perhaps many more. On April 28, 1908, her hired hand, Joe Maxson, awoke to smoke and flames, consuming the house with unnatural speed, forcing him to escape as the structure collapsed. Firefighters arrived too late to save it, and in the basement, they found the bodies of Belle's 3 children alongside the decapitated woman. The coroner noted they had been placed deliberately with no sign of smoke inhalation, meaning they died before the fire. As news spread, Belle's past emerged in a pattern of calculated misfortune deaths that brought her money visitors who vanished, and a chilling skill at turning trust into opportunity for murder. The story of America's murder farm had begun to unfold, and the truth about Belle Gunness would prove darker than anyone had imagined. Each of Belle's children had been insured for $1,000, a considerable sum that had helped the Sorensens recover from repeated business failures. The death of her husband, Mads Sorensen, now appeared in a far more sinister light. July 30th, 1900, was the only day his 2 life insurance policies overlapped, one ending at midnight, the other beginning at 12:01 a.m. Mads died that very day, officially, from a cerebral hemorrhage. But the first doctor on the scene, Dr. Charles Gillette, noted telltale signs of strychnine poisoning, an eerie rictus grin, an arched back, and clenched fists. His suspicions were brushed aside by the family physician, Dr. Frederick Olson, who had been treating Mads for an enlarged heart. No autopsy was performed, and Mads was buried quickly in Forest Home Cemetery. The $5,000 payout, an enormous fortune for a working-class Norwegian immigrant, allowed Belle to move to Laporte in 1901 and purchase the McClung Road farm from elderly widow Mattie Alder. Within months, she married Peter Gunness, a Norwegian widower and butcher who brought not only his skill with knives, but also his infant daughter. The child was dead within a week of arriving at Belle's home, allegedly from a sudden illness. Dr. Myers, now the same coroner investigating the fire, had found the circumstances troubling, but could not prove foul play. Peter himself survived only 8 months after their April 1902 wedding. His death on December 16, 1902, was bizarre. Belle claimed a sausage grinder had fallen from a high shelf, striking him fatally on the head. Yet those who saw the body, including Wilhelm Nebergall, who prepared it for burial, noticed the wound was too precise to be accidental. There were no burns, despite Belle's claim that scalding water had also spilled, and no defensive wounds that would suggest Peter tried to protect himself. An inquest briefly threatened to end Belle's run of luck, but she produced supportive testimony from farmhands and neighbors, and the case was closed. She collected $3,000 in life insurance and expanded her farm with new land and equipment, solidifying her reputation as a prosperous widow. But her deadly trail did not end with husbands. In September 1906, Jenny Olson Peters' teenage daughter, whom Belle had adopted, vanished without warning. Belle told neighbors she had sent Jenny to a Lutheran college in Los Angeles and even showed letters supposedly from the girl. Several who saw the letters remarked that the handwriting looked uncannily like Belle's own. When Leopold High School teachers tried to send Jenny's records, Belle always had an excuse. Jenny was traveling, had moved, or was too busy to write. Mrs. Elizabeth Tressler, a family friend devoted to the girl, wrote, repeatedly asking for Jenny's address, but Belle claimed Jenny no longer wished to be in contact with her old life in Indiana. It was a cruel dismissal that stung Mrs. Tressler, but it effectively silenced questions about Jenny's fate. The investigation took a dramatic turn on May 4, 1908, when Asle Helgelian arrived from South Dakota, his weathered features marked by worry and resolve. A prosperous wheat farmer who had worked alongside his brother Andrew for 15 years, Asle carried a worn leather satchel filled with more than 80 letters, correspondence between Andrew and Belle, that revealed months of calculated seduction. Andrew, a respected figure in the Norwegian settlements of South Dakota, was a marriage-minded bachelor at 49, with nearly $3,000 in savings and a fully paid-off farm. In October 1907, he answered Belle's advertisement in the Minneapolis Tidende, which seemed like the perfect match: another Norwegian immigrant, a farm owner, and a woman seeking exactly the kind of life he could offer. Belle's first reply, dated October 20th, was cordial, yet inviting, accompanied by a photograph of herself and her property. Over the weeks that followed, her tone grew warmer and more urgent. By December, she was writing of lonely days brightened by his letters of children eager to meet Mr. Andrew, and of a farm in need of a man's strong hand. She spoke of companionship, shared traditions, and the life they could build together. The most chilling letter came on January 13, 1908, written in Belle's distinctive blend of formal English and Norwegian phrasing. To the dearest friend in the world, come prepared to stay forever. At the time, Andrew took the words as a declaration of love. In hindsight, they sounded more like a death sentence. On January 2nd, Andrew withdrew his entire savings, $2,900, from the Farmers State Bank of Aberdeen. Bank President Lars Thorvaldsen recalled Andrew's excitement, likening him to a young man going to his first dance. He bought a new suit boots and a gold watch chain before setting out for Indiana. The last confirmed sighting of Andrew came from Harvey Darr, president of the First National Bank in LaPorte, who testified that on January 14th, Belle arrived with a man she introduced as her fiancé from South Dakota. They cashed a check for $2,900, refusing advice to deposit it for safety. Belle carefully counted and sorted the bills before leaving, while Andrew appeared withdrawn, speaking little. Soon after, Belle began telling neighbors conflicting stories. Andrew had returned home for urgent business, changed his mind about marriage, or gone to Norway to visit relatives. None of them were true. Belle's stories shifted with each retelling, tailored to whoever was asking, yet always believable enough to deflect suspicion. That changed on May 5, 1908, when Sheriff Smutzer, armed with Asle Helgelian's damning testimony and deepening doubts about the fire, ordered a full excavation of the Gunness farm. Joe Maxon, hoping to avoid charges himself, pointed investigators toward spots Belle had instructed him to fill in, calling them garbage pits. The first dig site was the hog pen 50 feet from the house's ruins. Barely 3 feet down, the men unearthed a burlap-wrapped bundle. As they opened it, the sickly mix of decomposition and chemicals like quicklime forced even seasoned farmers to turn away. Inside lay human remains, expertly dismembered hands, severed at the wrists, feet at the ankles, the head removed cleanly at the neck. When Asle was brought forward, he recognized his brother Andrew instantly, by a gold tooth, and most painfully, a silver watch he had gifted him 5 years earlier. Overcome, the big Norwegian collapsed in the mud, weeping as the grim truth hit him. Andrew was only the beginning. By day's end, 4 more adult male bodies had been recovered, each cut apart with the same precise method. Dr. Harry Pratt, a forensic expert from Chicago, noted the killer's skill cutting along natural lines, avoiding bone, the work of someone with either medical training or butchering experience. Within 2 days, the farm became the site of a massive dig. Over a dozen men worked in shifts sifting soil for remains, while crowds poured in from across the Midwest. Vendors sold food. Children tried sneaking in for souvenirs, and armed guards had to be posted to keep order. In a filled-in well, they found Jenny Olson, Belle's adopted daughter, who was supposedly studying in California. Her skull fractured by a blunt weapon, her body intact, likely killed before Belle began dismembering her victims. More names emerged. John Moe of Minnesota, last seen bringing $1,800 to invest with Belle. Ole Budsberg of Wisconsin, poisoned with strychnine. And Henry Gerholt of Kansas, whose pocket still held a toolset. $2. $500 bank draft Belle could not cash. Each discovery deepened the horror, turning LaPorte into the epicenter of a national sensation. Newspapers ran multiple daily editions, telegraph lines hummed, and special trains from Chicago offered murder farm excursions. Photographers sold gruesome postcards until Sheriff Smutzer shut them down. Locals monetized the morbid tourism, charging for parking or selling relics from the property, most fake. Amid the frenzy, suspicion began centering on one man, Ray Lamphere, Belle's former hired hand, a nervous, hard-drinking 30-something who had worked for her just months before the fire. Ray Lamphere's connection to Belle Gunness was tangled in rumor and uncertainty. Some claimed they had been lovers. Others insisted he feared her. What was certain was that after Belle fired him in February 1908, he began making ominous remarks about her and her activities. Under questioning by Sheriff Smutzer and prosecutor Ralph Smith, his story shifted constantly. At first, he claimed he'd spent the entire night of the fire at Elizabeth Smith's boarding house. But she contradicted him, saying he left before midnight. Lamphere then admitted to being near the farm, but denied setting the fire. Later, he conceded he had seen the flames, yet made no effort to warn anyone, saying Belle had ruined his life. Evidence found in his quarters at the Wheatbrook farm was damning: John Moe's monogrammed overcoat and Andrew Helgelian's gold watch chain. Lamphere insisted Belle had given them as payment, but no one could verify his claim. Investigators also found crudely written letters in his possession demanding $500 from Belle in exchange for silence. The case took a curious twist when Dr. Louis Schultz, a LaPorte dentist, announced he had made distinctive gold bridge work for Belle just 6 months earlier. Within hours, deputies discovered this very piece of dental work in the ashes of the farmhouse, despite prior searches finding nothing. The find was suspicious. Gold teeth had supposedly survived a blaze hot enough to melt glass and incinerate bone, and the bridge work appeared only after Schultz described it publicly. Witnesses even claimed they saw someone resembling Schultz near the ruins before the official discovery. More testimony painted a darker picture of life at the Gunness farm. Former servant Elnora Lapek, who worked there from 1905 to 1906, described being forbidden from the cellar, hearing strange noises at night that Belle blamed on restless hogs and smelling chloroform. Belle said was for medical purposes. She recalled male visitors arriving with luggage and hope in their eyes, then disappearing without explanation. Their possessions, clothing, watches, tools, would quietly become part of the household. Belle would prepare lavish meals for these men: fish soup, meat pudding, sweet cakes, and afterward they would grow lethargic, sometimes barely able to keep their eyes open. Belle would send Elnora to bed early, and by morning the guest would be gone, though his luggage remained in the room. Any questions were met with icy dismissal. By late May, letters poured in from across the Midwest, from families desperate to know if their missing relatives were among the victims. The Norwegian-American community was especially shaken. These were their kin immigrants seeking opportunity in America, only to vanish in Belle's web. From Wisconsin came August Gunderson, searching for his brother Olaf, last heard from in 1904, after speaking of a wealthy Norwegian widow. The Lindblom family from Minnesota sought news of Eric, who withdrew his savings in 1906 before disappearing entirely. Belle's list of potential victims and the scope of her crimes was still growing. From Iowa, the Dakotas, Missouri, and beyond, letters poured in, each telling the same grim tale of a bachelor with modest savings who had answered a matrimonial ad and never returned. Sheriff Smutzer set up a makeshift identification bureau, calling in Chicago experts to match remains to missing person reports. They used every tool available. Dental records rare among immigrants, distinctive clothing, personal effects, even bone analysis to estimate age and ancestry. Progress was slow, and many remains were too decomposed or too expertly dismembered for certainty. Still, some victims were confirmed. Tans Tony Lean of Rushford, Minnesota, was identified by a distinctive ring his sister recognized he had brought $200 to Belle in 1906. George Anderson of Tarkio, Missouri, was matched through a malformed foot bone from a childhood injury. He had arrived with $3,000 in 1905. Olaf Svenher of Chicago had come with $2,000 in March 1907. Each case revealed the same pattern: savings wiped out along with life itself. The scope of Belle's method emerged with chilling clarity. Her victims were almost always Norwegian bachelors between 40 and 60, financially comfortable, but without close family in America, men whose disappearance might go unnoticed for months. She rotated her ads through Norwegian language papers across the Midwest, never staying in one market too long. When family inquiries came, she had an arsenal of excuses. The man had gone back to Norway, gone north for gold. Boulder sought fortune in California. A trunk recovered from the ruins revealed how carefully she had managed her deceptions. Inside were carbon copies of letters she had sent to multiple suitors at once, each tailored to the recipient. To religious men, she quoted scripture and promised a godly home. To the lonely, she painted images of warm fires and family meals. To the wealthy, she hinted at land expansion and profitable ventures. By summer, the case against Ray Lamphere was taking shape, though it had a fatal flaw. Prosecutor Ralph Smith was trying to prove he murdered Belle Gunness without proving she was dead. The headless female corpse in the basement remained unidentified despite the suspiciously timed discovery of Belle's gold bridge work. Lamphere's defense, led by former Judge Wirt Warden, began spinning an alternative narrative that was as sensational as it was plausible. Belle was alive, and she had staged her own disappearance by killing a stand-in and her own children to cover her escape. The defense's investigators found witnesses to bolster the claim. Neighbor Elmira Studebaker, up late tending a sick child on April 27th. The night before the fire, said she saw a heavily loaded wagon leaving the Gunness property around midnight. The driver was a tall, broad-shouldered woman in a heavy veil matching Belle's build. A man, definitely not Lamphere, sat beside her. The wagon headed towards Stillwell, where the railroad depot offered connections to Chicago and beyond. William Clifford, the Stillwell night station agent, confirmed part of her story. William Clifford, the Stillwell night station agent, testified that in the early hours of April 28th, just before the Gunness fire, he sold a ticket to Chicago to a heavily veiled woman carrying several large carpet bags. She paid in crisp, bank-fresh bills, spoke in low-accented English, and refused help with her luggage. While he couldn't positively identify her as Belle, the timing and circumstances were suspicious. Meanwhile, Ray Lamphere's conduct in jail grew erratic. He alternated between declaring his innocence and hinting he knew far more than he would admit to authorities. His cellmate Harry Myers recalled cryptic remarks about chloroform bodies moved at night and Belle's unsettling physical strength in carrying corpses to the cellar. Though whenever pressed, Lamphere would grow sullen or contradict himself. The defense soon uncovered evidence suggesting Belle had meticulously prepared her disappearance. In the weeks before the fire, she sold livestock below market value, withdrew large sums from her bank accounts under the pretense of spring planting, and visited her attorney to update her will, leaving everything to her children, who, if the prosecution's theory was correct, she would murder days later. The most damning detail came from bank clerk Charles Edwardson, who swore that on April 27th, Belle converted over $30,000 in gold certificates and bonds into cash. When bank president Harvey Darac questioned her, she replied, "Sometimes a woman must be prepared for sudden changes in fortune." The prosecution fought to undermine the escape theory. Dr. Walter Haynes, a Chicago forensic expert, testified that the headless body found in the basement bore scars consistent with burns Belle suffered in childhood. But defense medical expert Dr. Augustus Caneb argued the marks could have been caused by the fire itself. Ray Lamphere's trial opened November 9th, 1908, in a packed LaPorte County courthouse. Crowds gathered before dawn. For the limited seats, journalists filled entire rows, and telegraph operators stood ready to send instant updates nationwide. Judge John Richter kept strict order as prosecutor Ralph Smith painted Lamphere as a jealous former accomplice turned killer. Smith claimed Lamphere, having helped Belle murder and dispose of victims, became a liability after she fired him and threatened to have him committed. Enraged, he returned on April 28th to burn the house with Belle and her children inside. The state's witnesses placed Lamphere near the farm that night. Farmhand John Solium testified he saw Lamphere running from the Gunness property around 3:30 a.m. Elizabeth Smith Lamphere's sometime lover confirmed he left her house before midnight and returned after 4:00 a.m., agitated and smelling of kerosene. The prosecution displayed John Moe's overcoat and Andrew Helgelian's gold watch from Lamphere's quarters, introduced chemists who matched kerosene on his boots to oil Belle had purchased the day before, and called Daniel Hudson, who claimed Lamphere drunkenly bragged, "I fixed Belle good. She won't be cutting up any more men." But defense attorney Wirt Worden countered with precision. Towering and eloquent, he told the jury they were being asked to convict a man of murdering someone who was very much alive. A woman who had staged one of the most elaborate disappearances in criminal history. Worden argued Belle had murdered a stand-in, killed her own children to silence them, and vanished with her fortune before the fire ever began. Worden's defense strategy reached its peak when witness after witness insisted the basement corpse could not have been Belle Gunness. Neighbors who had known her for years swore the body was far too small. Dr. Charles Meredith, who had treated Belle only months earlier, testified she stood at least 5 feet 8 inches and weighed over 200 pounds, while the remains measured just 5 feet 3 inches and no more than 150 pounds. The defense's most theatrical moment came with a demonstration meant to discredit the supposed dental evidence. A dentist recreated Belle's bridge work and subjected it to intense heat approximating the farmhouse blaze. The result was twisted melted gold and cracked porcelain, nothing like the pristine bridge work allegedly recovered from the ashes. When Dr. Louis Schultz was recalled to explain, he faltered under cross-examination, finally admitting he couldn't be certain the bridge was the same one he had made for Belle. The trial took an even darker turn when Ray Lamphere, against his attorney's advice, took the stand. His testimony was erratic, sometimes contradictory, but laced with vivid, chilling details. He described how Belle would drug her victims' coffee with chloral hydrate, wait for them to collapse, then strike them with a cleaver she kept in the cellar. She was, he said, strong as 2 men able to carry bodies down the stairs like they were sacks of flour. He claimed she would work through the night, methodically dismembering the corpses on a wooden table, before burying them in the hog pen or scattering the remains in soft patches of soil, covering them with quicklime to hasten decay. The hogs rooting provided a ready-made explanation for disturbed ground. Lamphere alleged Belle had murdered at least 42 women. 2 men mostly for money, but also to silence those who knew too much. Jenny Olsen, he claimed, was killed after discovering Belle's crimes and threatening to tell authorities, her skull crushed with a mattock before being buried in the old well. He insisted Belle had been planning her escape for months, ever since Assel Helgelian began inquiring about his brother. She had hired a woman from Chicago ostensibly as a housekeeper, but in reality as a stand-in corpse. On April 27th, Lamphere claimed Belle chloroformed this woman, along with her own children, arranged the bodies in the cellar, and set multiple fires to ensure total destruction. After 26 hours of heated jury deliberation, audible at times through the courthouse walls, the verdict came on Thanksgiving Day, November 26, 1908. The compromise decision, guilty of arson, not guilty of murder. It suggested the jury believed Lamphere had set the fire, but could not say who had killed the victims. Judge John Richter sentenced him to 2 to 21 years in the Indiana State Prison at Michigan City. Lamphere took the sentence without visible emotion, but as deputies led him away, he turned to the packed courtroom and said, "She's out there somewhere counting her money and laughing at all of us." The words lingered in LaPorte for decades. If Belle was dead, who was the headless woman in the cellar? If she was alive, where had she gone? And how many more victims still lay undiscovered beneath the soil of the murder farm? The investigation continued in fits and starts for years, with occasional digs turning up bones, but never another confirmed identity. Over time, the Gunness farm became more legend than land. In LaPorte's local lore, it was considered cursed neighbors swore no crops grew quite right on the old plots, and children dared each other to trespass after dark. No one would purchase the farm whole. It was eventually broken up and sold piece by piece, each section passing quietly into new hands that preferred not to discuss its past. Ray Lamphere's time in prison was short but turbulent. Tuberculosis struck soon after his incarceration, leaving him gaunt and desperate. His health failing, he began to unburden himself, writing rambling letters to newspapers, speaking in fragments to guards, and finally making a full confession to Reverend Edwin Schell in December 1909. 2 weeks later, on December 30th, Lamphere died in the prison hospital. Schell wrestled with whether to release Lamphere's confession. When he finally did in January 1910, it offered the most complete account of Belle Gunness's methods, though it deepened the mystery as much as it clarified it. According to Lamphere, Belle's approach was methodical and predatory. She placed matrimonial ads in Norwegian-language newspapers across the Midwest, targeting older bachelors with savings but few family ties. Corresponding with several men at once, she kept carbon copies of each letter to manage her lies. When a suitor arrived, Belle would charm him with warmth and heavy Norwegian cooking. The killing method varied. Chloral hydrate slipped into coffee chloroform-soaked cloths for sleeping men, or strychnine for the cautious. In the cellar, she worked with cold efficiency head first, then hands and feet, then limbs, finally the torso, each wrapped in burlap. Quicklime sped decomposition, and hog activity disguised disturbed soil. She laundered her profits in small deposits across multiple banks, also converting cash into gold certificates and bonds for easy transport. Lamphere estimated her take at over $250,000, more than $7 million today. The most shocking part of Lamphere's confession concerned the night of the fire. Belle had lured an unknown Chicago woman to the farm, under the pretense of housekeeper work, chloroformed her, bludgeoned her, and removed her head before dumping it in a pond. She then drugged her own children, telling Lamphere they were better off dead than living with her secrets. Whether the children were alive when the fire started, he could not say. She had sent him away before setting kerosene-soaked rags throughout the house. He helped her load trunks onto a wagon and drove her toward Stillwell, but she made him turn back before the station. The last he saw, she was walking toward the depot before dawn, carpetbags in hand. After Lamphere's death, supposed Belle sightings flooded in Chicago as a housekeeper in San Francisco, boarding a ship in New York, buying passage to Europe. The most credible came in 1910 from Oslo, Norway, where locals described a wealthy, watchful American woman on a small farm. She vanished before investigators arrived. In 1916, Esther Carlson surfaced in Los Angeles working for elderly men who died suddenly. She was arrested but released, disappearing before any link to Gunness could be made. In 1931, the same Esther Carlson was again arrested in Los Angeles, this time for poisoning a Norwegian-American man. She matched Belle's build, age, and appearance and carried photos of children resembling Belle's. 2 Laporte witnesses identified her as Belle, but before confirmation, Carlson died of tuberculosis in jail, buried in a pauper's grave. Former Sheriff Albert Smutzer, now elderly, viewed her body and said, "If that woman isn't Belle Gunness, then she's her twin sister." In the 1930s, retired Chicago detective Martin Holan claimed Belle had traveled as Bella Peterson to New York and sailed to Europe in May 1908, later buying a farm in Trondheim before disappearing again. In 1940, Route 35 construction unearthed 5 dismembered bodies on former Gunness land, including a victim identified by a gold pocket watch as Tones Lean of Minnesota. In 1943, criminology professor Ernst Hoffman published a landmark study estimating Belle had killed 40 to 50 people, calling her a one-woman criminal enterprise who mastered both murder and money laundering. Even into the 1950s, new claims surfaced. In 1952, dying Chicago woman Martha Steinbach confessed to luring a homeless woman to Belle in 1908 for $500, unwittingly providing the body for Belle's death. Though unverified, her story aligned with Lamphere's. By then, the farm had been carved into small parcels, its dark history scattered, but never forgotten. Its soil still hiding secrets no one was willing to dig up again. The land where Belle Gunness's farm once stood never seemed to shake its past. Crops withered, livestock fell ill, and families who tried to settle there found constant unsettling reminders of what had happened. Bones rising to the surface after heavy rain, soft depressions where graves had sunk, bits of jewelry or clothing emerging from garden soil. By the 1950s, the original farm had been carved into modest residential lots. Yet the discoveries continued. Every few years, a homeowner or construction crew would unearth more skeletal remains. Authorities stopped treating each find as a separate case. After 40 years, identification was impossible, and the bones were quietly reburied in a potter's field, reserved for the unknown dead of the Gunness farm. Today, the LaPorte County Historical Society Museum holds the largest collection of artifacts and records tied to the case photographs of Belle and her victims, the letters she used to lure men to her farm, and items recovered during the excavations. One of the most haunting displays pairs Belle's correspondence with Andrew Helgelian alongside his replies. Read together, they trace a chilling arc from Belle's calculated charm to Andrew's growing hope, culminating in his final letter written on the eve of his journey to LaPorte. "I go to you with joy in my heart and trust in our future together." He would end up buried in the hog pen within days. The shockwaves through the Norwegian-American community were profound. The case fueled anti-immigrant sentiment and cast suspicion on Norwegian bachelor farmers, who became seen as both potential prey and possible predators. Norwegian-language newspapers, once a vital lifeline for matchmaking among scattered rural communities, introduced stricter verification for matrimonial ads and began warning readers about fraudulent suitors and widows seeking companionship. Modern criminal profilers see Belle as far ahead of her time in her methods. She carefully chose victims unlikely to be missed quickly, varied her locations to avoid detection, maintained a credible public image, and used techniques such as personal ads and systematic body disposal that would later be associated with more contemporary serial killers. She exploited the insularity of immigrant communities, laundering her profits through multiple banks, and adapted her killing methods to the victim's behavior. Her fate remains one of American criminology's enduring mysteries. The connection to Esther Carlson in Los Angeles remains the most compelling lead. Carlson's appearance, age, and habits matched Belle's, and witnesses from LaPorte swore she was the same woman. Yet without definitive proof, Belle Gunness exists in the historical record as both a confirmed killer and a possible fugitive who may have escaped justice entirely. By the mid-1950s, the murder farm was completely transformed into rows of small homes and gardens. The occasional discovery of bones was usually dismissed as animal remains, though unease lingered. True crime enthusiasts sometimes showed up asking to see the site, and homeowners would call the historical society if they found anything unusual in the soil, while no remains conclusively linked to Belle's victims were found. After the 1940 road expansion, the psychological impact of her crimes lasted far beyond LaPorte. The Gunness case not only unsettled the Midwest, it challenged deep-rooted assumptions about women's capacity for calculated violence and reshaped the way America thought about both gender and murder. The idea that a woman could commit such calculated, repeated murders for profit was so unsettling to early 20th century America that many clung to the belief she must have had male accomplices who did the actual killing. Even now, some researchers argue Belle couldn't have physically managed the murders and body disposals on her own. But the evidence, including witness accounts and Lamphier's confession, strongly suggests she could and did. Her crimes also shattered the cultural image of rural America as a safe, wholesome refuge. The farm, once a symbol of honest labor and community, became the setting for industrial-scale slaughter. The widow, traditionally seen as vulnerable and in need of protection, emerged here as the predator. The immigrant success story turned into a tale of horror. These reversals of expectation left a deep mark on the American psyche, influencing crime fiction, popular lore, and public policy. Law enforcement learned hard lessons from the Gunness investigation. The importance of communication between jurisdictions, the need for systematic tracking of missing persons, and the value of forensic discipline at large crime scenes. The mishandling of evidence in LaPorte spurred changes in how multi-victim sites were processed, while the case itself highlighted the risks faced by isolated immigrants, especially those without local family or strong community ties. Belle Gunness's legacy in popular culture has been enormous. She has inspired books, documentaries, films, and even a musical. The archetype of the Black Widow who murders for money took root partly because of her, and the term murder farm entered the American lexicon as shorthand for rural horror. Belle became an enduring figure of the monstrous feminine, the idea of a woman whose nurturing exterior conceals predatory intent. Viewed through the lens of history, the case is more than one woman's evil. It's a portrait of a time and place where such evil could thrive. Rural isolation, vulnerable immigrant communities, slow communication, limited policing, and entrenched gender stereotypes combined to let her kill for years without consequence. The true number of her victims will never be known officially. Fine deaths are confirmed, but when unidentified remains and missing person reports are considered, the total could exceed 40. Each one represents not just a murder, but a family torn apart, savings stolen, and a future destroyed. The fascination endures because the case touches on primal fears. The stranger who seems kind, the neighbor hiding terrible secrets, the lover plotting betrayal. Belle may have been a monster, but she was a human monster, and that is what makes her so terrifying. Did she die in the fire or slip away into the shadows to live under another name, her fortune built on blood? We may never know. What we do know is that her story is a reminder that evil can wear any face, appear in any place, and sometimes the monsters who walk among us are never caught.